Alright, welcome to Newcastle Central. No real progress on that first of the station buildings. There has been an awful lot of pretty torrential rain the last week or so out here in the Seattle area, so I've kind of had that stuck out in the train shed. I haven't wanted to risk taking it back inside so I can do a little bit more work on it. I have done a little bit of other work, so a little bit of electrical work, so I want to talk about that just for a few minutes, but really I wanted to try and just do a running session, see some trends running around, coming in and out of the different platforms now that I've got some of those electrical fixes kind of figured out, and got the rest of the point motors all up and running on DCC and JMRI and stuff like that. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoy it. Alright, so while I haven't been able to work on the station building, I have been figuring out some little electrical gremlins that have been bugging me for quite some time now. You may have remembered going back a couple of years now, I started to replace all of the point motors, going from the SEEPs PM1 point motors and going over to Thames Valley Depot based systems that were using servo motors, 3D printed brackets to install them, and then connected into some Octopus 3 and DCC encoders so that I could digitally control everything. And when I was doing that, I had some amount of problems with polarity, that sometimes it would switch, sometimes it wouldn't, and I kind of tracked that down to the read switches not engaging fully. Most of them are fine, but I would say about half of them. About half of them were fine, about half of them it didn't really seem like the switch was engaging as the servo was being thrown. And the other thing that you may have seen on some of the videos over time is that I've had weird stuttering and stalling issues, where even though when they're coming over the frogs the polarity looks correct, or when they're coming onto sections of track, polarity is all correct, it's not shorting out, it is all running. It has been a little bit puzzling as to why it was having that. Track was clean, wheels on the locos were clean, and so I thought, well, let's do some cleanup on the electrical wiring that's underneath the layout. So it's all been pretty tidied up. What I actually found, and I wanted to talk about, as funny and as stupid as it is, one of my friends said it was a good learning experience and was worth sharing. Let's try and pop under the layout actually. So underneath the layout there are two main bus cables, and maybe it's kind of hard to see, but there's a thicker black and red 14 gauge cable, and then there's this green and white, which is the auxiliary DC power bus. So we got a DCC bus, and then we got a DC bus. And way back when I was using the SEEPs PM1 point motors, let's see if we can actually get it. There's a cool little capacitor discharge unit right around here. And that capacitor discharge unit, the idea is that it connects into that 12 volt DC bus, and then when you are wanting to throw any of those SEEPs PM1 point motors that have all been replaced with these blue Thames Valley Depot servo based motors, that capacitor discharge unit would essentially dump a bunch of power out to those solenoid based point motors that the SEEPs were running, and it would throw and change the points. What I had found when I had then hooked up, or started to, I guess, hook up a lot of these newer point motors, the servo based point motors, was that they do have a little read switch on them. It's kind of hard to see, but a little black read switch there. And so this one's engaged, but it would, as the servo arm moves, that read switch engages, and then on the top there's three wires that come off, one black, one red, and then green or yellow depending on how I'm feeling that day and what wiring I have available, then runs off to the frog. What I had found was this green and white was intentionally done to make it quite different from the black and red of DCC, but the power that was coming from the capacitor discharge unit, I stuck with black. And so what I actually had was a black power feed that was coming out to each of those solenoid based point motors, and then there was only the red DCC bus. And so when I had been hooking up quite a few, actually, as stupid as it sounds, quite a few of these new Thames Valley Depot based motors, I essentially had positive power coming off the DCC bus, and the negative power in quite a few cases I was actually taking off that capacitor discharge unit. So quite how, honestly, it actually ran, I'm not entirely sure. It's rather impressive, but essentially what I was ending up with was the frogs in probably 50-60+% of the cases were picking up a DCC on one rail and then a DC on another rail. Actually, the DC was coming from the capacitor discharge unit. So I guess depending on how long the train was and how much that capacitor was having to discharge as the train was going over and picking up power from it, could essentially drain the capacitor discharge unit. But as the trains were coming onto it, they were still running, they were getting power. All of these can do DCC and DC, but it's obviously not good for them. So again, I'm very surprised that nothing broke. I'm very glad that nothing broke. But it is one thing to kind of bear in mind as you're starting to do some electrical work. You know, I had tried to color code it, but it made sense at the time. That capacitor discharge unit would still be black as well. It was a mains bus feed for all those older solenoid point motors. But when I'd then been hooking up, thought I was doing the right thing, and I wasn't. So anyway, all of the frogs have been rewired where there were problems. All of those reed switches that were having problems have been adjusted a little bit so that they all engage correctly. It also gave me opportunity to install some other point motors that I hadn't gotten around to. So there were a couple here on the south side of the station. There's one there for fret bypass, and another one here, I guess. So they're the frogs, but the point motor will be there and there. Now, those two hadn't been in place before. I've got those done. And then all the way over on the north side as well, which technically is where the bridge would be. There was a crossover there between the north and south main lines, so that DMUs mostly would be able to start to come in these two platforms here. And so those two point motors have now been moved over as well. So functionally what we now have is everything is wired correctly. Stalling should be done, shouldn't have any problems there. The only thing kind of left to do, which I want to talk about because there's going to be another video coming up soon, there were some of the turnouts just when I built the bench work, because this is such a complex layout and so many turnouts, that I couldn't get point motors underneath. Just the way that the cross members were, just couldn't get them under, and it was probably going to be more hassle than it was worth to try and figure out doing, you know, extension pieces of piano wire and stuff like that so that they could throw from a distance. So what I ended up with going with is these surface mounted Pico point motors. I think they're PL11s. I had one or two on the north side, but I was able to get those replaced when I moved over to the servo-based point motors because I had just a little bit more room. There's two left over here. Actually, when I switched up with the servo-based point motors, this one I have actually been able to get one of those servo-based motors in. And what I actually ended up doing was then treading out because this one would not fit. So that one is a surface-based point motor. It's actually, sorry, there's a surface mount point motor there, but it's actually using a servo-based point motor. And then here, where there had been one of the actual solenoid motors underneath, now a servo-based motor doesn't fit. This one, nothing fits, nothing at all. There's way too many cross members under there. Can barely get frog polarity to it. But I am looking at the DCC concepts. I have just brought out surface mount, goodness me, surface mount point motors that look really small. You know, they look about half the size of these Pico units. They connect into a little box that would then go underneath the layout, and that can also do frog polarity. And coolly, it can also do the DCC control. I had looked at ways to connect this into an Arduino so that I could do DCC control, and didn't really have a lot of success. Had some ideas, and again it came down to cost versus time, and so I ended up just going with the DCC concepts approach. So they should be here within a week or so, so I'm looking forward to doing that. But anyway, enough waffling around of my stupidity with crossing the streams on those point motors between DCC and DC. Make sure that you don't do that when you're wiring things up yourself. But now for the rest of the video, let's just get into a whole bunch of running shots. Trying to do a little bit of a session now that I can move around and do a whole bunch. I've got all the different lights working too, so let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of some of these running shots, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching.